Okay, so talking about defensive strategies in a form of sorcery warfare and artificial intelligence and how the universal mind right now of the World Wide Web and the internet and is going to be the battle space and how to defend yourself against it. Well, in the very first video of this series, I talked a little bit about how there was a relationship between sorcery and warfare and the parallels of virtual reality warfare in a virtual world, and how a lot of that would, we're still trying to figure out why would people 1,000, 2,000 years ago, why would they even have a mentality that associates with that when the world of their age, much of this should not have been relevant to it. When the minds of the industrial age would look at a lot of that, and they would say, well, we've got a bunch of hocus-pocus superstition. Why would these people even think this way? Why would there have been any development from the ancient world for that type of mentality for survival? And it could be that in man's ancient history, this thing may have happened before. That's my opinion. As I get into a lot of this stuff, this transhumanism study, and people talking about the Anakim or Nephilim and all that kind of stuff, a lot of these things may have happened before. And the way God dealt with it was we had the Great Flood. We may have had some sort of intergalactic migration. But what we also recognize is there must have been some sort of technological regression. It was something where humanity, in whatever way, had those who maintained, especially a genetic purity, connection with the land and all that. So some sort of a regression happened where these people were very anti-technical. And we look at that where the Native Americans had really but never left the Stone Age, and they were for whatever reason, relatively content with not having left the Stone Age while the rest of the world progressed. After the time of Christ, we begin to see a massive acceleration in human development, which a lot of Christians would argue was the result of new ways of thinking, of the new thing. And most of the discovery and development of technology and all of that happens immediately after the time of Christ. And as the word spreads, that becomes much more accelerated, and that's also where we start to get a lot of the prophecies where somebody somewhere is starting to have dreams and visions of, hey, wait a minute, here's what's happening in the future, or here's the logical conclusion of these things, where the cycle maybe restarts, or the cycle somehow goes to a logical point, or a logical restart point, or a logical conclusion of something. But as a lot of those people understand the sequence of events, kind of like the creation story, and we're not really sure if we're talking about 7 days or 7 periods of time, or what is a day, or that sort of a thing, we know about the sequence. We know about how the sequence of these things happen. We know kind of what things need to happen before other things happen. We really don't know about the time frame involved. This may actually stretch out for incredibly long periods of time, or it may be compressed as it progresses. In either event, a lot of us may be alive to have to survive these things, and we also want to create a resource for survival for those future generations that we choose to preserve, and then to a certain degree, anybody who would listen. So part of this is that the battle space of the virtual conflict is going to continue to change and evolve. And that requires constant study, constant development, and constant strategies for it. Now, what I'm seeing personally is that I become financially better off the more I integrate with internet interaction. If all I could make a living from is the people on my street, I wouldn't be able to make a living. When I worked in car sales, I did a lot of financial profiling on upper middle class people. I worked at a luxury car dealership. I spent a lot of time with a lot of bankers. Chase Manhattan was opening banks in the San Francisco area. I worked in Marin County, and I was doing the financing with a lot of these bank employees, a lot of vice president, bank manager types who are transferring over, who are involved in the dot-com boom and the funding for that and a lot of those types of things. Not necessarily the top dogs in that game, but people where I got to see what was going on. I also dealt with a lot of entrepreneurs, upper-end entrepreneurs. And one of the things I noticed, even apart from the dot-com boom, the people who could afford brand new cars, the people who could afford sports cars, things like that, were able to make their money not depending on a local economy. They could bring money in from an outside economy, and that's what they were spending. So if you wanted to develop an area with an economic boom, you had to figure out some way to suck wealth in from outside and to make that area attractive to the kinds of people who could bring wealth in from the outside. And that's one of the reasons why Marin County, California was a very wealth magnet type area. It was a comfortable place for people to live with money. Here in the Portland, Oregon area, there's some neighborhoods in the Beaverton, Hillsborough area which have become very attractive to people from India and Bangladesh who have made money and don't want to live in the midst of the dire poverty which are prevalent in those countries. But they still want to be around people that eat the same foods, that speak the same language, that think the same way. And so they gravitate to that neighborhood. And when I worked there, I recognized that. But what they bring to the community here in Portland, Oregon is they're bringing the money they make. They bring their productivity. But a lot of that is still kind of dependent on the virtual world, and I've noticed it because I do blue-collar work with those people. There's no way I could compete with them technically on a lot of things, that I'm able to financially find my place in that little bit of world doing the blue-collar work. And that's where we look at the parallel development of survival mechanisms in an environment where you can be attacked and targeted and punished electronically and not even know who's doing it, not even know who's giving you orders. You can suspect it, you could feel it, you'll never be able to prove it because it's intangible. When I look at the mechanisms of a police state, but even with virtual attacks and artificial intelligence-based attacks, those may not even be coming from a police state. The champions of freedom, libertarians, could win the next series of elections and find out that all those Republican, old school haters of freedom are still going to have control over their own mechanisms. They may not be able to use the IRS to automatically target people. They could simply adopt some of Nelson Mandela's philosophies of using crime as a political weapon, as using crime as a revolutionary political weapon. And not only are you going to be subject to the human intervention of the e-jihad, where there's somebody on the other end of that computer, you'd be on the wrong side of these artificial intelligence programs that develop by those exact same people who would use a weaponized version of the IRS to target the Tea Party. What's the response of that? Well, the people who would be in control of the infrastructure of tyranny would probably try to do warfare back, and we've got hack warfare, but it's no longer government versus government, political party versus political party, but it would be who sets an artificial intelligence and a spell in motion against what they consider to be an enemy demographic. That's an environment where you need to be able to remove your dependency and take that genie, take that all that magical thinking type stuff and put it back into the monk in the cell and cut yourself off from that guy. You have to make it where that guy doing all his magical thinking in his cell, because he's connected to you through the internet, can affect you, or because that artificial intelligence out there, that demon in cyberspace, can affect you. You need to be able to disengage from that and still be able to live with whatever benefits of technology that you're able to bring to bear in your personal life. And that's where coming up with the backup plans, coming up with retaliation plans if you have to, you still need to be able to have the ability to engage in physical conflict. A physical conflict is not going away. Swords and bayonets didn't go away just because guns were invented. You still have to be able to engage in physical conflict. The other thing you probably would recognize is the stereotype of the sorcerer or the pencil neck geek or whatever, a person who's primarily trying to use a non-physical means in conflict may not be as good at engaging in physical conflict. When we look at first generation and second, third generation warfare, the guerrilla war of the third generation is usually not going to be as effective at conventional warfare as a maneuver warfare. Okay, you ask any special forces unit operator, any special forces unit commander, hey, what happens if you go head-to-head against an armored brigade? You're going to get your ass beat, okay? You're going to get your, if you have a team of special forces guy that got to go head-to-head against an armored brigade, they're going to get their asses beat. Here's the thing where a freedom-based resistance, where they're having to fight against a artificial intelligence, this is where you get a lot of leverage. Those who would become dependent on using the artificial intelligence and your dependence on the internet to attack you, they have to pull that resource from something, and they may have a much more limited resource in being able to able to engage in physical combat. They may not be able to engage in much physical combat at all. That's what Jim Bell figured out. He figured out he didn't like the ATF. He didn't like the IRS agents that went after him. He went through a lot of effort to try and get his artificial intelligence attack mechanism going, which other people eventually developed. But he didn't have the balls to kick in a door and start shooting. Okay, he didn't go that far. One of the reasons he got locked up is they felt he was about to reach that stage. He was about to reach a stage of frustration because his system wasn't working. A lot of the infrastructure that was needed for his artificial intelligence thing to be able to raise money, it wasn't in place. Now, Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining is in place. Jim Bell couldn't necessarily find people who would be motivated to take action, because on his system, somebody still has to go out there and do the dirty deed and then get paid. We didn't see situations where there would be a scaled down version of that conflict where maybe there's an automated system that just starts going after people's bank accounts. It starts going after websites and Facebook pages. It uses facial recognition to recognize somebody who's been targeted and just hack anything that associated with that person. We'll see little bits and pieces of that when somebody decides not to like a celebrity, that all of a sudden they're going after any pictures of this person, any website that they participate in. Maybe it goes after speech and writing programs. Maybe there is somebody who feels that they own the right to a certain type of musical sound. That sound then becomes a search criteria for an artificial intelligence to go through the internet, find any similar sounding musician, and sabotage their work because they want to be able to own a certain sound. Then what we have to look at is developing the ability to withdraw from that dependence on the internet, even though we still use it, even though we still interact with a lot of people and we make our money that way. One of the things that I've worked on developing is, even though you may make your money on the internet, even though you may be highly dependent on it in your lifestyle, develop a parallel cash income, and develop the means of a parallel cash income which involves physical money and physical barter. Now, there's a lot of people who talk about gold and silver coins. I have some silver laying around here, no gold. But don't forget good old-fashioned cash, good old-fashioned Federal Reserve notes. Make sure that you have invested some form of income generation which is very physical and very cash and very blue-collar, very trade-oriented, where maybe if your stuff crashes, and I'm not talking about a major WROL or a major SHTF thing, but if there are attacks on the virtual you, how can you make a living? What is your means of being able to survive that and preserve yourself? And then we look a little bit further into what are the other things that you value and how could you preserve those things when they're turned off. I live in a city, and I know a lot of other people live in a city and would be highly dependent on the system. But what if you become targeted? What if for some reason somebody out there, for their own reasons, or even by mistake, don't forget the first several murders that we see in the Terminator movie were all these other people named Sarah Connor, and we don't learn until partway through the movie why is everybody the computer, the killer robots going through a phone book and just killing everybody named Sarah Connor. You don't know how you might be targeted by an artificial intelligence system, which means that regardless of what your political motivations are, your other activities, you don't know what somebody else's decision is on targeting you. So develop means of cash income, because we know a lot of those are going to be, they're vulnerable, okay? And if it's vulnerable, then it can be attacked. Develop physical means of self-defense, because we know that even though a highly sophisticated and capable virtual attacker may be after you, and they may be highly sophisticated and capable in a virtual attack, the actual physical attack may be something you could beat. It could be something you can defend yourself against. It may be just that tweaker, that drug addict who knows that he can be paid in Bitcoin to harm you, and the Bitcoin is a currency that they can obtain narcotics with. It's almost a narco currency right now, because it's a currency of vice. Now, we don't know what currencies other people might be using, but you still need to have the means of self-defense. You still need to be able to defend yourself in physical space. I would suggest practicing 1 day a week, 1 weekend a month, every once in a while, unplugging. Practice the art of unplugging. Go about your town, your city, your life, and understand what would happen if you unplugged for a week. Is it possible for you to run your life unplugging for a week? Unplug your, turn off, pull the battery out of your cell phone, turn off your computers, unplug for 1 week, and see if it's possible to run your life. See if it's possible to make any money for that week. If it's not possible to make that money for that week, see what your bills are. See if it's possible to unplug. Now, I'm not saying turn everything off and live by firelight, but see if it's possible to live off-grid. See if it's possible to generate your own power, your own sources of income, and your own survival off-grid. What I've found in experimenting with that is I definitely need to communicate. I need to be involved with other people for that. It's very difficult to do that alone. And in developing the relationships with other people of like mind who would work with me on something like that, I'm saying, hey, how could we live with an acceptable quality of life if we unplug for a week, a month, a few days? What if we did this for a month? Originally, we started to look at that in saying, how could we live if we unplug, if the shit hits the fan and WRL and all these other types of survival scenarios. And originally, we weren't looking at the inevitability of our virtual selves being targeted. And some of the people involved in our group had become virtually targeted. Their sources of income were one, they were attacked by thieves. A person who was involved in an online business, their website got taken down, their accounts locked up. Another person I know was involved in a pretty decent little online business, and the company that did his credit card processing just up and changed the rules on him, and they said we'll no longer support tobacco related products. This guy bought and sold fancy pipes, fancy old tobacco pipes, and pipe tobacco. He checked the regulations, he checked the laws. The laws were permissive to what he was doing, but somebody who decided to program the computer changed the way that would work, and he was basically through an automated system, very little human intervention. They simply canceled his account, shut down his websites, his online store, and he saw his income drop. Now, fortunately for him, he had a backup plan, and that he still maintained a physical regular job at a brick and mortar business, but his income dropped. Would he be able to live totally by unplugging? Not half bad. But that's where I talk about some things that are going to come up in upcoming videos, is how to live with all of the advantages of technology, yet still be able to survive unplugging. And I think that's going to be the key to personal survival in the 5th generation conflicts of the modern age. We need to be able to take that virtual enemy and decrease his relevance to our personal lives.